Hello, my name's Talin Shahinian, and I'm going to be talking about Feminism and Women's Rights Movement, article made by Council of Europe portal. Feminism and Women's Rights Movement. In this article, it talks about women's rights movement and explains how some people still do not think we need feminism or believe in feminism, and how they go into depth of why this statement is untrue. For centuries, women have had to fight for equality against oppression. They talk about how some areas have experienced improvements and explain how women in Saudi Arabia were allowed to vote and run for office for the first time in 2015. While on the other hand, there is still no progress, especially on cases of violence against women. Women all over the world still continue to receive a lower pay while doing the exact same work as a man. The idea of feminism is a reflection of a lot of different struggles. While the term could be interpreted in a more complex way, feminism is seen as a type of movement in order to end sexism, sexist, and the oppression in order to achieve full gender equality. The next topic that the article talked about is the history of feminism. When the French Revolution started, women had taken part from the very beginning. The demonstrations that had led to the revolution had originally started with a group of women that were protesting for not only food for their families, but also for a change in politics. Unfortunately, the revolution did not have proper recognition for women's rights. The modern women's movement is made up of women and men who work together and fight in order to achieve gender equality and to help improve the lives of women as a social group. In most societies, women were traditionally limited to the home, whether they were daughters, wives, and mothers. Unfortunately, we now only know women in history only because they have a relation to a man who is famous. The women who throughout history have played an important role for women's rights tend to be invisible and forgotten about. It was in the 19th century that women's movements started, even though these issues have been around for countless centuries before the 19th century. The first wave of feminism. This first wave was the fight for women's rights to vote in elections. This fight was known as the suffrage movement, that by the end of the 19th century became a worldwide movement. It is also when the words feminist and feminism started to be used regularly. By 1920, women had finally won the right to vote in North America and parts of Europe. Around this time, women were able to get jobs that were outside of the home. Around the 20th century, women were allowed to go to university and have both a job and a family, which was not common before. During the end of World War II, they started to organize again, and at the end they had gained equal political rights in most European countries. From women's freedom becoming important, this allowed them to take on full-time jobs and be able to divorce their husbands. The second wave of feminism. This second wave was aimed for the achievement of women's liberation. Different groups had different ideas of how it should be done, with little agreement. It explains the different types of feminism, from liberal to radical, and finally socialist. From the liberal feminist point of view, they wanted equality laws and reformed institutions such as churches and the media. While radical feminists state that the main problem of women's inequality is patriarchy. They were concerned with violence against women by men, as well as violence in the family that needed to be addressed. Lastly, socialist feminists said that it's a combination of both capitalism and patriarchy that causes women's oppression. The second wave also meant that women's studies would be available at universities, and there were many books that were published about women at the same time. The third wave of feminism is mainly about the American movement in 1990. This wave increased awareness about the overlapping of categories such as race, class, gender, and sexual orientation. This wave is more actively used media and pop culture in order to promote their ideas. The issues for this wave was about sexual harassment, domestic violence, the pay gap, eating disorders and body images, and the reproductive rights. The final wave being the fourth wave of feminism. This wave is referred to as cyberfeminism. Cyberfeminism is used to express the work of feminists that are more interested in making use of the internet and new media technology. The last thing I will be talking about is sexism. Sexism is a term that is often used in feminist literature, media, and everyday life. The article explains how sexism means perceiving and judging people only because of them belonging to a certain sex or gender. They also talk about how sexism applies to both men and women. However, sadly, women tend to be affected more by this than men. From telling jokes to objectifying their bodies or even reacting to the way a woman dresses, these are some ways that sexism affects women. These effects can be directed to their mental health, and this can cause their mental health to get worse by lowering their self-esteem from the constantly being judged for what they're wearing or for just being themselves. In conclusion, this is the importance of feminism and the women's rights movement, and how it evolved more rapidly in recent years, from gaining rights to vote, from advocating for women's safety, from domestic abuse, and for still having to protest for equal pay and equal job opportunities. We see how women have been trying for centuries to have their voices heard, and how much they had to fight for their rights and for the generations to come. Thank you for listening.